For a long time, we told ourselves that American democracy is guaranteed, but it's not. Democracy is still at risk. This is not hyperbole. It's a simple truth. In our bones, we know democracy is at risk. Democracy itself is in peril, here at home and around the world. Whether democracy is still America's sacred cause is the most urgent question of our time. That's what the 2024 election is all about.
Hi again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock here in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez in for Nicole Wallace. President Biden says it a lot because he means it and because it's true. American democracy is on the line, seeing as Biden's likely opponent in the 2024 presidential race is someone willing to take a wrecking ball to it if he were to return to the White House. How do we know? Well, look at what he's already said and done. Former President Trump has stoked distrust in our election systems. He's cozied up to dictators while criticizing our global allies. He's fueled hatred and division and, oh yes, incited an insurrection against the U.S. government. He's hit at the heart of what makes America, America. It is not only those in this country who feel this way. The rest of the world recognizes the threat as well. President Biden just told donors at a fundraiser in California, quote, every single world leader that I've known, and I've known all of them, literally all of them, the last 40 years, every single one, when I attend international meetings now, not a joke, grabs my arm and says, you've got to win. You've got to win because my democracy is at stake. A hugely consequential election coming up in less than 7 months, underscored by Trump just yesterday, doubling down on his comments that if a NATO ally does not pay up, he will not defend them. Former Congressman Republican Adam Kinzinger went so far as to say a second Trump presidency, quote, would be very devastating for the world order as we know it. And it's an issue on the top of Americans' minds. A new Quinnipiac survey gave people a list of 10 issues and asked which is the most urgent one facing the country today. 21% said preserving democracy in the United States, 20% said the economy, 17% said immigration, and 10% said gun violence. No other issue reached double digits. As President Biden said, democracy is still the most urgent question of our time. And that is where we start today with MSNBC senior political analyst Matthew Dowd. Also with me at the table, columnist for The Atlantic, Ann Applebaum, and Democratic strategist and director of the public policy program at Hunter College, Basil Smikle. And when the president talks about other world leaders coming up to him and saying, it's not just your democracy that is on the line, it is my democracy on the line. What is their core concern?
Let me answer that by quoting a member of the German parliament, of the Bundestag, whom I saw in Munich last weekend, who said to me, we are faced with a real prospect now that Europe will be facing three autocracies, Russia, China, and the United States. So America's traditional allies in Europe, in Asia, and elsewhere are afraid that the very nature of America will change, and therefore their relationship to the United States, their relationships to one another, their security relationships, their trading relationships. They believe it's a very existential election, and I'm sure Biden was telling the truth when he said every world leader he meets wants to talk about it.
The fact, Matthew Dowd, that you have world leaders saying in the future there could be a world where they see Russia, China, and the United States in the same camp. Just how terrifying is that?
Exceedingly. I mean, I'll take us all on a sort of short history lesson of the rise of democracies in the world. When World War II ended, there were 10 democracies in the world, 10 democracies in the world. That number rose every decade until its height in 2016 of 96 democracies. So basically the post-World War II order with the United States at the lead of it was a rise of democracies along the world. Today, there are 6 less democracies in the world since 2016, since the rise of Trump and everything associated with Donald Trump. So we've lost 6 democracies. Our own democracy has actually moved from a full democracy to a flawed democracy because of the attacks on the rule of law and the attacks on whether or not you'll accept election results here. And so all of the rise of democracy around the world that we've seen has been stopped per se. And now we're in great danger of it moving in reverse, which is not only is it just the theoretical idea of democracy and one person, one vote and majority rule, but all of the issues that people care about around the world and in the United States, whether it's healthcare freedoms, gun violence, economic justice, all of those things are dependent on the existence of a healthy democracy. And Europe completely understands that.
And if you are President Biden, Basil, how do you speak to this moment?
Well, you speak to the moment by reminding America how fragile our democracy is, but how interconnected we are. And I say that because going to Matthew's sort of history lesson, I was thinking the other day about Barack Obama during the campaign in 2007, 2008, traveling the world, went to Germany. He went to other parts of the world, say, you know, in a way to sort of unite us and talk about this new vision, this new view of the world under, you know, an America that was about to change dramatically because it was about to elect its first African-American president. Juxtapose that with these ads that I see on social media with Trump's sneakers. And, you know, interestingly enough, there are folks that are calling them the new January 6th sneakers, right? And it's sort of funny, but it's not, because what it does is remind us that how much that insurrection and everything and everyone associated with it is so embedded in us right now. But it's also a movement to not let anybody forget who's responsible for it. And that's incredibly important, because whether it's through intentional ignorance or not, Donald Trump doesn't seem to firmly grasp how interconnected we are in this world, from our financial system, from our waste treatment. Everything is connected, and he does not seem to care. And he will plunge the United States into a place that we probably haven't been in 100+ years. And it's important for Joe Biden, if not to go through the specifics of that, but just to remind everyone how their life will dramatically change under his leadership.
Well, and there are myriad examples of his America First philosophy. I do think the NATO comments are currently top of mind. Here was the Polish foreign minister on Morning Joe today. They had this to say about Trump's NATO comments. Take a listen.
NATO, an alliance, is not a contract with your neighborhood property protection company. Article 5 of Washington Treaty has only been invoked once. For an attack in this city after 9/11 by all the allies. Poland sent a brigade earlier, first to Iraq, and then another one to Afghanistan for a decade. And we didn't send an invoice to the United States because it's an alliance. So that kind of rhetoric is unhelpful.
I mean, a fundamental misunderstanding of what an alliance is, how an alliance works. I think part of what is so terrifying, beyond the much more tangible question of global security and a global world order, is like who we are as Americans, how we identify as a country, as a democracy, if we are not willing to stand with our allies.
I think if you look back at American history, Americans like the idea that they're doing something good in the world, that we are associated with other countries that have some kind of ideals, that are trying to make something better, that are trying to live in free societies. We were the left and the right in the United States were united during the Cold War, not about everything, but certainly about the idea that freedom was good and that other countries that wanted freedom should be helped. And also, if you know, the rule of law, you know, that we're a law-abiding society, that we're ruled by the Constitution and by lawyers and not by lawyers, but by judges and not by the whim of a dictator, and that we are aligned with other countries that are also ruled that way. And I think changing that will change something fundamental about America. I mean, if we are explicitly aligned with rule-by-law countries, rule-by-law meaning dictatorial law, against rule-of-law countries, then I think you'll find people being very confused about who we are and where we belong in the world. I think you're absolutely right to point to this as a kind of as an existential part of what it means to be American.
Especially because I think sometimes, Anne, we talk about this as though it is just a question of if Donald Trump gets reelected and puts this vision into action. The truth is, even if he is not reelected to a second term, he has incepted this idea into the American psyche. There will be a portion of the American electorate who doesn't understand why we're a member of NATO, who doesn't understand why it is important to the global order for us to stand with our allies, who doesn't understand at a base level why it is important for American safety and security. And so with or without Donald Trump, there's still a reckoning that is forthcoming.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's been too little explanation to people. I mean, for example, if America is no longer the security provider in Europe or in South Korea or in Japan, then there are all kinds of advantages that America has that will disappear. Will people go on buying American airplanes or American energy equipment? We have people automatically want to put us first and do things for us first because of those security relationships. If those are gone, then the United States will just be another competing power. Not sure if we should trade with them. Maybe we should have barriers, tariffs against them. Maybe we shouldn't buy their things. I mean, a lot of modern American industry is dependent on those security relationships too, and I think people might need that re-explained.
I'm just